out in the hall that want to join the conversation about downsizing and I know, look at you and me with our shoes. Downsizing and organizing. Come on in. We're going to start here in, I'm going to say 1 minute and 30 seconds. All righty. Other people can come join us whenever they want. We won't call them out as they come in late. No, I'm just kidding. So Corrine Nairn and I go back a long way. A long way. In children and youth and ministries and church and stuff. Anyway, so this is the other side of Corrine, is Shamrock organizing. And so Corrine was part of our market in August, I want to say, June. Todd's like, in June. And then I said, you need to come to our Seniors Wellness Day. And she said, I will do that. So without further ado, the lovely Corrine.
Thanks, Tracy. Yes, I do come out of a background of ministry. I'm going to introduce myself in a minute, but first, I just wanted to say, as I know everybody's been acknowledging that it is Truth and Reconciliation today, I had quite a battle with myself this morning about whether I should wear my Shamrock shirt or my orange shirt. I was at a learning day that I coordinated for our chapter of professional organizers in Canada on Thursday, and we met right downtown. And as I was looking at our land acknowledgement, there was something quite poignant about meeting so close to the joining of the bow and the elbow, where you are really where the city was born, but the city wasn't born, because long before the city of Calgary was here, there were the First Peoples who were here. And so I recognize that we are on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 Nation, Métis Region 3, but a reminder that today on Truth and Reconciliation, I know for myself, as I look at my daughters growing up, the biggest thing I know is that there is work to do, and that I don't know that the work will ever be done, but it certainly won't be done if we don't work at it. So for me, that's my acknowledgement of living and working in this shared place on this land that was cared for generations before us, that I resolve to become better at reconciliation myself every day, and also to raise daughters who understand what that means and who will work toward it. And I don't know if you know much about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but the kids are all right. They know more than we do, that's for sure. So my name is Corrine. I recently ended 20 years career in children's and family ministry. I live in Hawkwood. I am married to Richard, and I have two daughters. Both, one is just about 21 in university, and the other is 11. Now I have a confession to make. I was not always organized. And some days I'm still not organized. It is a myth that all professional organizers have like perfectly organized houses with nothing in it. I wasn't always organized for more reasons than just because it didn't come naturally to me. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which I was diagnosed with as an adult, in part because when my younger daughter was at the therapist, the therapist said, her brain is so busy, it distracts even me. And I went, oh, that's not just normal. And so when you look back at my history, it looked like the teachers were copying out of the diagnostic manual on my report cards for what ADHD was, but 50 years ago, or well, not 50 years ago, but 40 years ago, girls were not considered to be somebody who would have ADHD. It was considered to be a character flaw, that you talked too much and you weren't organized and you just couldn't achieve at the level you should. So for me, organizing has become, though, a coping mechanism. It's something I do to feel calmer. I don't necessarily think it makes my family calmer all the time when I organize. Terrifies my husband a little, depending on how big the task is that I take on. But what I have found over these last many years is I have spent my life organizing things, whether it's stuff, or I have a degree in theater, and I have spent a lot of time organizing productions and people. In ministry, I was organizing events and children. I was administration before I was in ministry. And so in many ways, it's been a life's work. In fact, when we travel, I pack the car once, and then my husband replicates it. Because I can see how it fits. And that isn't the truth about everybody. So another thing about me, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later, is that I am about to be sandwiched. And that's a little bit what I want to talk about today. So what I mean by that is that I am 50, just about 51. My mom is 75 and my dad is 80, and they are divorced, so now we have two households that each have another partner in them. And my eldest daughter is finishing university. So I am a fully grown adult most days with a house full of things, and I have two parents who have houses full of things, and I have a daughter who before long is also going to have her own house full of things. So before I go a little more down that path, I'm going to ask everybody a question. Just shout out the answers. What does organizing mean to you? Or being able to find things. Less clutter. Simplifying. Anybody else? Shredding. Sorry? Finding a place for everything. Alphabetical. So, a weight off your shoulders. Yeah, I can't tell you during COVID how much stuff I downsized and organized and got rid of because it was a method of coping with the amount of stuff. Yeah, I would say all of those things are organized. But the thing that came across there is everybody has a different meaning because it's very personal what it means to be organized, as is the very personal meaning of what is right-sizing or downsizing. It has personal meaning, and it has a personal timeline. So I'm going to ask, how many of you have downsized at some point in your life? Moved from a larger house to a smaller one? Yeah. How many of you downsized? Was it hard? How many of you have had to clear the home of a loved one who did not downsize? How hard was it? Again, shout out your answers. What made it hard? Too much stuff? Decisions? So you feel a lot of pressure to kind of not miss something? Anything else about what made it hard? Wasn't your own stuff? Family feuding? Did it make your grief harder as you were clearing out stuff? sentimental memories. So, as many things that came out there were just like the same thing as organizing. So, as I've said, I have 2 parents in 2 different homes, each with a partner. And one of the things that you find is as soon as there is more than one person in a house, you are going to have conflicting styles. It's normal. It's normal in how we think. It's normal in how we operate every day. It's normal in how we take our coffee. It's normal in how we find order in ways that other people don't find order. I'm sure that every one of you knows somebody who's a stacker. And they know exactly where everything is in that stack, but it makes you crazy because you can't find anything because it's in a stack. But if you ask them, they can go to stack 2 on the left, go down to the second sheet from the bottom, and they've got it. So for them, it's organized, right? I can't say that's not organized. So you have conflicting styles. It is another thing that can make downsizing or right-sizing harder. So my dad just turned 80 at the beginning of September, and my dad purchased the family farm from his great-uncles after his grandparents passed. It was a homestead. It was built in 1912, and with that homestead came all of the antiques and the things that belonged to his grandparents and his great-uncles and half of his aunts. And now he has some of them. Some of that stuff is gone, but a lot of it he has. And my stepmom keeps trying to send it to my house because there are only 3, I have 3 stepbrothers, but they aren't Hacketts. I'm a Hackett, and I have 2 cousins that are Hacketts. And so you have him who wants to hang on to those things still. He'd like to have them in his house, in his life. And my stepmom who's like, can it go? So you have conflicting styles. Makes things harder. And you have conflicting styles about who thinks stuff has sentimental value and who doesn't, and if you should get rid of it or you shouldn't. I have 2 very dear friends who become very dear friends, and she has had a lot of trauma in her life. They've had trauma together, but mostly she has had a lot of trauma in her life. And she has a very hard time letting go of things. He is not the same. So he'll say things like, just get rid of it already. Why do you have to keep so much crap? And every time he does that, she holds on harder. Because you have conflicting styles, so it makes it harder. And then you have whole other complicating factors like neurodivergency. After I was diagnosed and my girls were diagnosed, I was at my parents' house and I looked at my dad and I went, oh my gosh, Dad, you totally have ADHD. And my stepmom started to laugh. Not in a mean way, but it was like this light went on. That there are, and I would expect over the age of 50, there are probably hundreds of thousands of people who are undiagnosed with neurodivergencies because it wasn't a thing. So you have other conflicting styles that can make it harder. All right, so now I've told you why it's hard. Now we're going to jump, or maybe acknowledge why it's hard. And so now we're going to jump into why I call it right-sizing instead of downsizing. So we're going to have a couple of tools. One are some stories, and one is this marvelous little book. I could not recommend this book more highly. It's called Dostadning, or The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. The woman who wrote it is Margareta Magnusson, and she, as she says in the book, she's between 80 and 100. I believe she's 89 now. And it is funny, and it is poignant, and it is quick and easy to read, and it is just such a beautiful little book, and it has so much wisdom in it. And so I am going to draw on her wisdom along with my experience. So why do I call it right-sizing? Because maybe you don't want to move, but you want less to clean, and you want more time to do things that you want to do instead of maintaining and cleaning all your stuff. Maybe it's step 1. Maybe the right sizing is moving from a larger house to a smaller house, not moving from a small house or a large house to a much smaller, like an assisted living or a seniors living residence. Maybe it's step 1. So that's right sizing, and sometimes right sizing is downsizing. It often is, and I recommend it for everybody, including my 11-year-old. Because it's a process that goes on all the time. We are always right sizing. Because if we aren't, we start to lean into challenges where we get into what we call in our industry chronic disorganization, where the things start to take over the living space. Some of you would hear, the TV show Hoarders, which is the language is not hoarding, it is hoarding disorder, because it's recognized now that it is actually a mental health condition. It's not something people can just stop. But that's why but for most of the population, we spend most of our lives right-sizing. And if you're not right-sizing, one of my dear friends calls it goldfishing. Because goldfish grow to fit the size of their container. And that's what we do with our things, right? We goldfish. If we have a house that's this big, we fill it out with stuff. If we have a house that's this big, we fill it up with stuff until we fill every house we're in, until we have to make it smaller. So you go from goldfishing to right-sizing. So how do you know it's time to right-size? Well, I think it's always time to right-size, like for everybody, literally everybody, including my 11-year-old, who would keep every piece of art she ever makes. But here's a few questions. Are you only living in a part of your home? Maybe you have 6 bedrooms and there's just you and your spouse, and maybe your kids or grandkids come to visit sometimes, but most of the time, maybe you're using one of those as an office and one of those as a bedroom, and 4 of them are going to where you have to dust them, but nobody's in them. Or you have several rooms on your main floor and you're using your kitchen, but you never use your dining room or the office or the den or the library or the whatever, depending on the size of your house. Is it getting more difficult to maintain that space? Can you clean it yourself? Can you manage the yard and the lawn? Do you want to? That's another thing. It's not always ability. It's how much time it's costing us. And do you have and need support if you want to? Are the expenses of the place you're living, no matter the size of it, draining you financially? And do you want to make a change, because that would free up resources to do fun things that you would rather do than dust, clean, and pay money and maintain yards that you don't want to maintain? And if I can't stress anything more than this, it's, do you have a plan if there is a crisis? Because I know for me, as the child of parents who are 75 and 80 in good health, my worry isn't about now. My worry is what happens if there's a crisis. Because I know 100% if there's a crisis, I am the eldest daughter. My sister on the one side, my half-sister, has 2 small children. And I have 3 brothers who are not really organized folk on the other side, that it's going to be my problem to deal with. And I love them, and I will do it, but it's going to be a lot easier if there's a plan before there's a crisis. So here's a startling fact. Because it's overwhelming to start, they say over 75% of people over 75 don't want to right size because they don't know what to do with their stuff. So they don't do anything. Because it's overwhelming to think about starting. So why do it then if it's overwhelming and you have the space and you don't need to worry about it and you have the money and you can handle your house? Because it's a gift. It's a gift for yourself because it reduces all of the stuff you have to deal with, and it's a gift for your loved ones. So I'm going to read, this is out of Margareta Magnuson's book. Do not ever imagine that anyone will wish or be able to schedule time off to take care of what you didn't bother to take care of yourself. No matter how much they love you, don't leave the burden to them. So if you don't downsize, what's the worst thing that can happen? Or right size? Throw it out. Sorry? Someone else has to do it? It all gets thrown away. You have no control over what happens to your things. Anything else? So those are the worst things that can happen. So I'm going to talk about some of the best things that can happen if you do it. First of all, what does it give you? Space, control, peace of mind. might bring in some money, time to do other stuff than clean or try and find things can save you money. I know the saving money part, even in my own family. When you know where things are, you don't go buy another one and then go, oh, I already had one, shoot. Or it's gone or damaged or whatever because it's hidden where it is. So if it gives you great things and there's downsides to it, what stops us? What's your biggest fear about right sizing? The reality of aging. Mm-hmm. The just in case clutter, we call that in my industry. Yeah. Anybody else? It's hard to share those because the fears are real, right? Me as an adult child, it's not just my own feelings about mortality, but the feelings about mortality about my parents, and that's hard. So that makes for hard conversations with our children, our adult children. Painful ones. Being sad about giving it away. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so sometimes the fear is not being able to control what happens once it's out of our hands. That's hard, right? So I am going to feed that fear a little bit. I'm sorry. So I'm Gen X. I'm like right smack in the middle of the years that Gen X are. And my daughters are Gen Z. And then the next one's coming behind are Gen Alpha. And I can tell you right now that my daughters want no China, crystal, fancy things, none of it. And I don't want my mom's. I already have some that I know is going to have to find a place or not. And so that is a tough thing to face. Sometimes, like the woman sitting next to me at the table, she said she took it and she uses it every day. I was like, if you can find somebody who will do that in your life, that's a lucky and cool thing. If you find somebody who's like, you know what, I'll take grandma's china, but I'm putting it in the dishwasher and I'm using it every day, and if it gets broken, I'm not yelling at my kids. Right? Because it becomes now something that's usable because we don't use it every day, but they did. I have dishes that are over 100 years old from my great-grandparents, and I'm sure they'd be mortified to the fact that they're sitting at the bottom of a china cabinet and I bring them out on special occasions because they were everyday wear for them. So here's a thing that's going to be hard to hear. The children of baby boomers also don't want the things. When you downsize, they don't want to upsize. But some of the things that's hard is dealing with that and not taking your grief out at them as anger for not wanting the things. That's hard. So do you have something, just like think in your brain, I want you to think in your brain. Do you have something, we've heard about the one that you know your daughter won't want. Do you have something that you either know or suspect and are kind of worried about so you don't want to bring up that your children or grandchildren do not want when you try to get rid of it? Do you have anything that jumps to mind when you think of that? The tea service. Yeah. 110 years old. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you were going to say? Most of the stuff you've already been told by your kids. Anybody else have anything they want to share that they're like worried that they don't want to bring it up because they're afraid their kids don't want it and they don't want to have the conversation about it? Yeah. So I'm going to ask you this. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't, and I'll tell you why. Partly because of my 21-year-old daughter, who will tell you everything like it is. If you want a really honest perspective on stuff, she'll give it to you. I'll give you her number. Well, no, I won't, but yeah, she'll tell you. I'm going to ask you this question. What is it that you really want to pass on? Yeah, is it the item or is it the memories associated with the item? It is hard to look around and face the fact that the items that we value don't necessarily have value to anybody else and don't have a monetary value. And there's a lot of reasons why that's difficult. One, we live in a consumer society that says the more you buy and the more you have, the more successful you have. The bigger house you have, the more stuff you have in your house, the more successful you are. Therefore, people should look up to you because you have stuff, right? But if you haven't recently been in a thrift store, Goodwill or Value Village or any of the thrift stores and looked around, you can find stacks upon stacks of silver and china and crystal, and they're all cheap. Because the generations coming up and the generations that are now, many of them, it doesn't have a value for them because they were status symbols 100 years ago. When you had a silver tea service, you had to work to earn that, and it was a status symbol that you could do that, and you brought it out, and you learned to serve tea, and you did those special things, and they don't do that now. The kettle goes on like this. They have their favorite mug that has a snippy saying on it, and that's how they're going to have tea. And so that's hard. But it's going to get harder. 1,000 Canadians a day turn 65 from today for the next 18 years. 1,000. So with that comes the largest transfer of generational wealth and less, even more than wealth, stuff that has ever happened in our history, because the boomers were a big generation and all of the generations coming on are getting smaller. So when you have, you know what a funnel is like, right? It's like a funnel. You have all of this stuff from the baby boomer generation that's coming down to this little generation, and Gen Z is standing at the bottom of the funnel with their finger in it because they don't want any of it to fall on them. So now I'm going to ask you another question. I want you to think about this one for a second, and then I'm going to ask you to turn to somebody near you and answer this question. And then if you want to share, you can. I want you to think about what the thing is that you own that is the most valuable to you. Not monetary value, not how much money is it worth. What is the thing you own that is the most valuable to you? Think about that for a minute. And once you've thought about it, you can turn to somebody next to you and tell them what it is. Yeah. I think we're going this way because the generations coming behind are hugely environmentally conscious, and they are concerned about stuff in the environment. Not all of them, but there's a tipping point, and they're coming to a place where they don't want stuff because they know that to build the stuff, it costs the environment. Like, they have this little calculator in their head that thinks about stuff and the environment. It depends on who it is. It depends on who it is, right, and how they function. But a lot of those people they do like experiences. So that is a different value system. So I'm just going to ask if anybody wants to share, they can. But first I'm going to ask this question. How many of you, of your favorite thing was something that had a high monetary value? It's fine if it does. Don't be embarrassed. Nobody? Would anybody like to share what their most valuable thing was? Sentimental value as opposed to monetary value? So there's a couple of things that I want to talk about now related to that. Relieve yourself of the guilt. Having grown up in the church from the time I was born, literally the first church service in the small town I grew up in was in my great-grandparents' home. So I have grown up in the church. I have grown up and I have watched the evolution of the church through the UCW and stuff like that. And one of the things that I've noticed that is very similar in churches to homes is we have a guilt associated with legacy. We don't want to change things because we feel like somehow we have disrespected the people before us if we change what they did. Or we have disrespected our great-grandparents because our children don't want their things. That somehow we have failed because we have been unable to impress upon the next generation the importance of the value. So here's the thing. Just because somebody that came before you gave you something doesn't mean you are responsible to keep it forever and know what's going to happen to it past you. Because once the things are passed down to you, they are yours to do with what you want. They are your things. And once they are passed down to the next generation, they're their things if they take them, and they then get to determine what they want to do with them. But that's hard because it comes back to that word of legacy, memory, the stories, not the things. And sometimes the things, somebody was saying it's the thing that sparks the story. 100%. 100%. We look at things and they bring memories for us. And so here's one of the things I would say as somebody who's 50. I have my great-grandma's china. What I wouldn't give to have recordings of her stories. Because when she died in 1998, there was no cell phones to just capture everything, to hear the stories of growing up, of, crossing the border from Wisconsin and coming up to northern Alberta and living in a homestead and everything that went with that. That's what I want, but I can't have it. I have some that are in my memory, but we have so much technology now, we can do that. I'm going to tell you what the most valuable thing is I own from my two grandmothers. Cookie cutters is one. Because I could tell you 10 different stories about the cookie cutters. When my dad came in and ate the elephant cookie that I made for my grandpa and how mad I got at my dad. I was maybe 5 or 6. But I remember that. I remember that I would help my grandma make cookies and then go off into the living room and watch a show while she cleaned up. And the joke that was. I remember singing and dancing to records on the record player, one of which was Annie, and I went into theater, and years later she saw me do musicals because I sang and danced in her living room, but all of that comes from my cookie cutters. And the other thing, it's my grandma's secret recipe tips for matrimonial squares. My grandma's matrimonial squares were my favorite, and I tried matrimonial squares everywhere, and they were never as good as my grandma's, so I called her one day, and I said, Grandma, why are your matrimonial squares so much better than everybody else's? And that was sort of like, hi, Grandma, and that was my next question. And she laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed on the other end of the phone. So I have, in my memory, in my heart, that joy of that conversation of her laughing that I would say that, but I also have her secrets. I won't give them to you, but I will give them to my daughters. Because they're legacy. They're memories. Do those cookie cutters have any value for anybody else? Nope. Do they for me? Yeah, lots. I have her opal ring. It doesn't mean close to what those cookie cutters mean. And that was what I wanted. When my grandparents were moving out of their house, I said, Mom, she said, is there anything you want? I said, can you find a Christmas ornament for me out of her Christmas ornaments, and can you get one for each of my girls? My youngest has no memory of my grandma, and my eldest has some memory, but they each have a Christmas ornament. And my eldest is 20, and she doesn't like stuff, but that Christmas ornament is the most valuable Christmas ornament she has. There's no monetary value to it, but it's legacy. She knows her great-grandmother put that ornament on a tree every Christmas, and now she does too. So here's my advice. Invite those people over that you want to share the memory with. Share the memory of the item. And maybe they do want the item. Maybe they want tea, but first, maybe they want the tea service or the teacups, but first serve them tea in it and tell stories. and share the memory and the legacy, because I promise that is so much more valuable to most people than anything else that you can give them. And then if you want to give them something, ask them, but don't obligate them. And that's the hardest part. So I am going to go into some more like technical things, or not technical, but kind of like some tips and stuff here. Yes, yeah. I do. I really do believe that, because that is the thing that I hear from people. What they value is the relationship. And what they value is time more than anything. And they value stories. Like my daughter now, 20, like she's busy. But did she want to hear about Grandpa curling? Yeah, because Grandpa curled and she curled. And Grandpa was my grandpa, her great grandpa was a really good curler. And when he had dementia, he could still talk about curling because he could remember that. I haven't, but I'm going to. Because it had that to me, I know my kids don't want the china and all those things we have. Sometimes they want a special piece. My mother-in-law came not 2 weeks ago and gave a gift to my eldest daughter. And it was a bowl, a china bowl, and I thought, oh, fingers crossed, because my eldest is like not into stuff like that. But it was hand-painted by her great-grandmother, my mother-in-law's mother-in-law. And she promised her mother-in-law, it's one of the only things she has from that side of the family, she promised her mother-in-law before she died that she would give it to her eldest granddaughter. So 2 weeks ago, she gave it to my daughter. My daughter loves art, and she is so grateful to have that. But it's one thing. It is not an entire, China service or anything. And it meant something because her mother, her grandma, promised her great-grandma, who she never knew, that she would be the person to get it before she ever knew she would exist. Yes, and I'm going to talk about that and about the gift that is and how we do that. And I think that is something that is overlooked when we right size, often because it's a crisis. And so there's no time. So when there's time, we can do some of those things. So I'm going to cover one topic that's that's a hold off. Sometimes there's things that matter to you that don't matter to anybody else. And they're not going to matter to anybody else, but they're super sentimentally important for you. Margareta Magnuson in this book talks about her throwaway box. She has a box, and in that box goes something that's really special and sentimental to her. Maybe it's a card, maybe it's a little knickknack that she got. She knows that her kid's never going to want the magnet, nor would she want to pass it on because it wouldn't mean anything to them. She keeps it in that box, and she calls it her throwaway box, and on it it's written, "When I am gone, throw this away." So she's keeping the things that matter to her, but she's also not putting the burden on the next group to agonize over whether or not they should throw those things away. She's telling them, throw it away. Throw it away. So that's one thing. All right, so I'm going to go a little bit into the the tip section here, because I know we're about 40 minutes in, I think. So first thing I'm going to say, the first and most important thing to do when you're thinking about right sizing is to identify the stakeholders. The stakeholders. If you're a single person with no children, no siblings, it's just you, maybe your friends, maybe you're the stakeholder, maybe it's just you. But for most people, there is going to be more stakeholders. Your spouse, your adult children, your grandchildren or great-grandchildren perhaps, maybe siblings if you have things that belong in the family somehow. There are stakeholders. Does that make them the decision makers? No, but it makes them stakeholders. They have a stake in what is going on. So identify those people first and think about where they fall in the process. So who needs to be involved, and then open the lines of communication. The sooner, the better. Because none of these conversations are easy. because we have to out loud acknowledge that we're not always going to be here, or our parents aren't going to always be here. And that's hard. And it hurts. And some people deal with that by right away, up goes the wall, and so they don't want to talk about it. And so it's going to take time to get through. Some people get defensive because they don't want the stuff, and so they put up a wall that has nothing to do with necessarily the emotion, but more it's a physical wall. So the sooner you can get those stakeholders figured out and start having conversations, the better shape you're going to be in if there is a crisis or when you're ready to do the things you want to do. Some of them are going to make the declarations, I don't want that, don't even ask me. Some of them are going to start outright like that. And some of them are going to fight over things that never occurred to you that anybody would fight over them. So identify the stakeholders, open the line of communications, and do it sooner. So my first tip to get started is about having those tough conversations. So there's little tiny chapters in this book. They're like a page or page and a half each, and it says, how to discuss the topic of death cleaning. And she says, when I was young, it was not really deemed polite to speak your mind to an older person, including your own parents. It was especially frowned upon for younger people to discuss topics that older people had not asked their opinion about first. And she says a little more, and then she says, it's stupid, really, and sad. A missed opportunity for the different generations to know each other better, and death and preparing for death were not usually discussed. So I think that there's wisdom in that. You know, does a 6-year-old grandchild or great-grandchild really want to think about when grandma and grandpa might not be here with their parents? No, it has to be like age-appropriate conversations, obviously, but it's important things to talk about, and it can start opening up those other conversations from what some of the other people have talked about, maybe moving into some sort of assisted living or like personal directives. My mother's a retired RN, so not only do we have the personal directives, when she had hip surgery, she was talking about full body donation for science, and I texted my sister, and I said, like 2 weeks ago, Mom said her partner was a little anxious about her hip surgery. And I said, well, yeah, because if she's saying stuff like that, no wonder he's anxious, you know. But for her, it's an easy topic to discuss because it's just part of what she's done. She worked in long-term care. But it opens up other conversations when you start to do these things, and that's important. I've had to have tough conversations, but I still have struggles having those conversations with my parents. My mom lives in a beautiful house. It's large. She has more art than could fill a museum that she has collected over her life. Her partner is in a wheelchair. He had an accident in 1998 that nearly killed him, but wound up with a full amputation. And they're both reasonably healthy people, but they live on an acreage 20 minutes outside of the closest city. And at some point, we have to have a conversation about how long that's sustainable. Right now, it's fine. But when it's not, I don't want it to be a crisis. But that's still a hard conversation to have. So even if you're not planning to move and you want to right size, I'm going to talk about a few little things about the easy part of it, right sizing when you're not thinking about moving. And then I'm going to talk about some things to make a difficult task easier. So here's some just really super basic organizational tips for everybody, not just people who are thinking about right sizing. Think about safe storage practice and store for retrieval. Put the things you use the most in the most accessible places and store anything that is heavy and you don't use low. You can store very light things that you don't use up higher, but for the most part, you want things that you need to use most of the time, somewhere between your knees and your shoulders. That's just safe practice. And store for retrieval. The best way to store things is how you're going to try to find them. So that may work differently for different people in a household, whether it's labeled, whether it's, you know, what you think is logical. Have that conversation, because sometimes logical isn't the same for one person as the next. And you know what? All of these things will help if there's a crisis, because then people start to know that this is the stuff that's used the most, and here's how I can find it. And also remember, and this is one of the biggest thing I took away from my training, is we can all only do habit change +1. So if somebody comes in every day after work and they chuck everything on the floor and then go do their thing, or their kids, if you have an 11-year-old like I do, everything just goes in one spot, they are not going to be able to move from that to hanging the coat up in the closet and taking something over here and doing something else over there. But they can do maybe habit change +1. Maybe you can get them not to just throw it on the floor, but maybe you can get them to throw it all on a chair. That's +1. Once we get that habit changed, then we can add a piece. Everything goes on the chair, but your coat goes in the closet. And once that's established, and so on, right? So it's the same with organizing and learning how to store things for retrieval and how we're going to organize stuff, how we're going to make decisions about what we keep and don't. Habit change +1. If you try to do it all at once, you will likely not succeed, which is one of the reasons you don't want to do it in a crisis. Does anybody have any other questions about like just easy organization tips that way? Those are big pieces, but that's my best advice. So here's some things. Oh, sorry. Yes. Oh, read Atomic Habits. Yes, Atomic Habits, a great book about changing habit and how you do that. I can't remember the author's name, but if you look up Atomic Habits, it's a highly, highly recommended book. So I'm going to, oh no, where's my Magnuson passage number 3? Did I write it down where I was going to say that? Let me just have a quick look. Oh, that's the throwaway box. We did that one. All right. So here's some things that can make a difficult task easier. Number 1 is having the time. That is the number 1 thing that makes a difficult task easier, is giving yourself time to do it. So I'm a theater person. I have a theater degree, and when you build a production schedule, which is the production schedule is all of the time from when you start talking about a show up until essentially opening night. And when you build a production schedule, you work backwards. You start on opening night, and you figure out how long it's going to take you to do all the things you need to do to get there. You work backwards. So right-sizing is the same kind of thing. Do you have a deadline? Figure out the deadline and what needs to be done by then, and put a plan in place that works backwards so that you can figure out how much time you have. And always assume it's going to take you at least twice as long as you think it's going to take. Build in contingency. Don't start the hard things first. I'm going to say that again louder. Don't start the hard things first. So many people are like, you know what? I'm just going to face all those family pictures and letters that I had from my husband when we were 22 and just getting married and young. Don't do it. Build the muscle. Start with the easy stuff. So many people think, I'll do the hard stuff, it'll be out of the way, and then I can get on to the rest. You'll never start because it's too hard and you haven't practiced. You go to the gym, you don't go and pick up the 100-pound weight first. You start at 2, and then you go to 3, and then you go to 5, and then you go to, it takes time. So do the easy things first. Easy is different for everyone. If you're a bibliophile, books are probably not going to be your first place to start. If you're a clothes horse and you love your shoes, probably don't start there, but find something that's easy. Maybe you can get rid of a bunch of stuff in the kitchen. Then again, maybe you're a cook and that's hard. So pick a place for you personally that you think, yeah, there's probably not a lot of emotional attachment to X category, and start there and then work your way up. It takes 6 to 7 waves to really go through all of your things to really be able to get rid of everything you could get rid of. But you got to build the muscle. Know where your things are going and that they'll be valued. That's a number 1 release thing for a lot of people. And it doesn't have to be to somebody in your family. Maybe the Immigrant Women's Association has put out a call for things for new refugee families. You're going to know that whatever that is going to be valued and needed by someone. If you're somebody who is concerned about ethical disposal, knowing that things are going to be recycled or go to the best kind of waste possibility, you're not dumping hazardous chemicals into the landfill, or you're not, things are being shredded that should be shredded and composted that should be composted, and what each of those things are. That's another thing that makes it easier, is having that list of resources. Having support, be it family or otherwise. There's lots of people like me out there, professional organizers, if you don't have family members that are close, but family members or friends, people in your community that are willing to help, maybe you can walk the path with somebody else. Maybe you have a best friend in the same spot in life, and you call each other and you laugh and laugh as you sort through a category that you've chosen together. Because the companionship on the journey always makes a hard task easier. Tell your stories and make it fun, even when it's sad. You have to take time to acknowledge the grief, because there's grief. I was going through my mom's linen closet with her, and she looked at one of her tablecloths, and she looked at me and she said, I'm probably never going to use that again, but I'm not going to get rid of it this time. She knew, she was acknowledging it, and that's hard. That is hard. That's hard for me to think about. My daughter's going to be 21 in the fall. She's going to be done university and she's going to move out. That's hard. We go through all these things are hard, but we can do hard things if we give ourselves the time and the space to do it. Don't just go, I shouldn't be sad. It's fine. It's just stuff. Let's get on with it, because then you don't allow yourself the time to grieve. So how do you make that fun? Well, I heard a story about a family that had kids who got along. I got to put that out first. If you do not have kids that get along, do not try this at home. They had things in their house that their adult children wanted, but they weren't things that had any monetary value. It was like the chess set that we all learned to play chess from dad, and all of these like weird things that were not weird, but like things that were special to the kids because they had sentimental value but no monetary value. So they invited them for dinner, and they gave them each $2,000 of Monopoly money, and they had to bid to figure out what mattered most to them. And then the parents didn't have to choose who got what special thing, and they didn't have to fight about it when their parents were gone and they were grieving and sad. And then we have conflict because we're all fighting over dad's chess set. So even sad things can be fun if you find a way to make it fun. It's not going to work for every family, and every family doesn't have that relationship. And then lastly, look for the positives. What does it give you? More time, maybe more money if you're in a smaller home, more flexibility, more security, knowing that you're physically safe. Maybe you're moving from a house with lots of stairs to one that's a bungalow or something. And maybe you're not moving at all. Maybe you're just going to spend less time cleaning and less time trying to find stuff and more time hanging out with your friends and telling stories and sharing memories. So before I wrap up, that's the most important thing I want to pass on to you, is when you're thinking about right sizing, that is a very personal decision. What it means is different for everybody. What has value is different for everybody. But I can promise that there is almost no one for whom stories aren't valuable. So when you're thinking about right sizing and thinking about giving things away, if the only thing you can give away is the memories, you've given something that's worth more than gold. So thank you. And does anybody have any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Don't start there. Because for you, that's something that has that value. But then the next question is, okay, maybe you're not ready to let those things go, but maybe you'd be willing to let go of the paper and turn them into a digital format. It's often a thing with photos too. Photos take up a lot of space. I brought today, you can see slides that were my grandfather's that's on my list of things to do, is to digitize those. So maybe there's another solution. Maybe they can be digitized and then you can have them that way. So you haven't let them go, you've still got them. Or maybe for you, that's the throwaway box. Because maybe they have value to you, but you don't want your kids to have to go through them later on. And so you put on the box, like, these were my articles, throw them out. But they mean something to you. So I think that's what you have to know, is what means something to you, and you know what you want to keep. Nobody has to let go of anything.
You know the best thing to do with Grandma's silver key service? Give it to a 2-year-old with a sandbox.
It's amazing to see how things can be used like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great idea. Ways to upcycle. And the other thing is turn things into art. There's a woman in Edmonton who makes art out of keepsakes, and they're beautiful. And you come away with one framed piece that has all these different special items in it. You could do it yourself if you're a crafty person, but now you don't have 6 boxes of stuff. You just have what, is really matters.
It's great. No, that was awesome. Thank you, Kareen. We have a few minutes. I just want to tell a quick story too. So we right-sized when we renovated our house. So we didn't downsize our house, but we had to leave, and we put everything into a, one of those things, pods, on your driveway. And so we essentially had to move out of our house. And at that time, we had like boxes and boxes and boxes of books, because like a physical book, right? But you're not reading it again. You're not going to read it again, and no one wants it. But we took pictures of them. We took pictures of those books, and at least you have like you said, the digital, right? And the throwaway box. I said to my kids, we did our wills, and we're using the cheapest possible thing. So I said, don't be shocked when you see Mom in a pine box, essentially, like it's not cardboard anymore, but it's the next step up, because they don't do cardboard anymore. If they did, I would be in a cardboard box. But I'm just saying, don't feel guilty. I said to my kids, don't feel guilty. Now, here's a bunch of my stuff that I find important. You can put that into the box with me, and it can be cremated with me. It's important to me. You don't care about that card or that item or that whatever. Put it in there with me, and then it can just stay with me. Anyway, thank you very much.
And one thing Margareta says too is, if for the love of all things holy, there is something will horrify or embarrass those that come after you, get rid of it before you're gone.
Oh, that's a good idea. Very good idea. Yes, thank you very much. All right, we're going to take a few. Thank you, Kareen. Let's appreciate that. So we still have time to go see her booth if you want to.